Welcome to China Truths. Today we will bring you the following stories. Non-citizen Chinese student charged with voting illegally in Michigan. U.S. Senators urge Treasury and Homeland Security Secretaries to end trade loophole and stop fentanyl smuggling. Chinese hackers compromised multiple Canadian government networks for years and stole information. Australia boosts missile defense following China's ICBM test. EU busts tax fraud ring with underground Chinese banking ties. Now, let's dive into the details. It's all covered in today's China Truths. Non-citizen Chinese student charged with voting illegally in Michigan. Michigan officials have charged a non-U.S. citizen Chinese student for casting an illegal vote at an early voting site in Ann Arbor on October 27. Only U.S. citizens can register and vote in our elections. It is illegal to lie on any registration forms or voting applications about one's citizenship status. Doing so is a felony, the offices of Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Washtenaw County Prosecutor Eli Savit stated on October 30. A clerk had alerted officials about the illegal vote, leading to an investigation. The non-citizen was charged with one count of unauthorized elector attempting to vote and a count of perjury for making a false affidavit for the purpose of securing voter registration. Officials said the non-citizen voting was an extremely isolated and rare event. Investigations in multiple states and nationwide have found no evidence of large numbers of non-citizens registering to vote. Even less common is a non-citizen actually casting a ballot. When it does happen, we take it extremely seriously. Our elections are secure and Michigan state and local election officials carefully follow the law, officials said. The officials noted that voting records are public, and any attempts by non-citizens to vote fraudulently will be exposed, and fraudulent voters prosecuted. Benson's office confirmed that the defendant is a Chinese national and student at the University of Michigan. The 19-year-old had registered to vote on Sunday. He established residency in Ann Arbor by using his student identification and other documentation. He also signed a document vouching for his supposed U.S. citizenship, the office said. The student later contacted the city clerk's office and attempted to retract the illegal vote, according to Benson's office. His ballot was already processed through the tabulator. Detroit News had reported that the illegal vote cast cannot be retracted, as the vote tabulators do not track votes back to the individuals who cast them. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel has also opened an investigation into the matter, independent from Savit's office. This is the first year Michigan is offering early in-person voting. A 2022 amendment to the state constitution made it so that Michigan voters now have the right to vote in person a minimum of 9 full days before any major election. Representative John Molinar, a Republican from Michigan, called on Benson to announce a plan to prevent similar election fraud in the next week and secure the elections against China interference. The University of Michigan should expel this student for violating the laws, and the state's leaders need to take serious action against China's attempts to influence the state, Molinar added. U.S. Senators urge Treasury and Homeland Security Secretaries to end trade loophole and stop fentanyl smuggling. Four Democratic senators are calling on the Biden administration to eliminate a trade exemption that allows packages valued at less than $800 to ship to the United States with relatively little customs scrutiny, citing concerns that drug traffickers are exploiting this loophole. In a letter dated October 28, the senators told Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas that they should use their statutory authority to eliminate the trade provision known as the de minimis exemption for e-commerce shipments. We are particularly concerned by reports that drug traffickers are abusing the de minimis exemption to smuggle illicit fentanyl and its precursor chemicals into the United States, turning an exemption into a loophole, the lawmakers wrote. The four lawmakers are Senators Elizabeth Warren, from Massachusetts, Richard Blumenthal, from Connecticut, Sherrod Brown, from Ohio, and Sheldon Whitehouse, from Rhode Island. The letter referenced a recent Reuters investigation revealing how a maintenance worker was able to receive more than 15,432 pounds of fentanyl precursors in small packages shipped to his home in Tucson, Arizona, from China. The opioid epidemic is a serious threat in the United States that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, the senators wrote. We must use every tool to combat it and protect American families. Earlier this month, 8 China-based companies and 8 Chinese nationals were indicted for allegedly trafficking synthetic opioids and fentanyl precursors. The defendants openly advertised their ability to thwart border officials, used evasive tactics such as mislabeling the contents of shipments, and had shipped a stable supply of precursor chemicals to clients in the United States and Mexico for years, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ. In July, the DOJ announced the indictment against a Chinese national for allegedly exploiting the trade loophole to import more than 2 tons of fentanyl precursors from China. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, processes about 4 million de minimis shipments a day. From 2018 to 2021, CBP data showed that between 61% and 77% of de minimis shipments originated from China and Hong Kong. In September, the White House announced new steps to crack down on the de minimis loophole. That decision represented a first step toward addressing abuses of the de minimis provision, the senators wrote, adding that additional actions are necessary. The Coalition for a Prosperous America applauded the White House's announcement but said the proposed measures are long overdue. Lawmakers from both parties have introduced several bills that aim to rein in the de minimis exemption, particularly for shipments from China. In June, Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, and Brown introduced the Import Security and Fairness Act to end the de minimis loophole for goods from China and Russia and require the CBP to obtain more information about de minimis packages entering the United States. This loophole is essentially a backdoor way for competitors like China to ship goods into the U.S. without paying the tariffs and other taxes and fees they owe, Brown said in a statement at the time. Our bill would stop Chinese companies from abusing our trade laws. A companion version of the legislation was introduced in the House by Representatives Neil Dunn, a Republican from Florida, and Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat from Oregon. Warren, Brown, Whitehouse, and Blumenthal also asked Yellen and Mayorkas to respond to several questions before November 12, including the DHS's current estimates of the amount of fentanyl and the amount of illicit trade that enters the United States annually via the de minimis loophole. We urge you to act quickly and use your authority to protect Americans from drug dealers and predatory online vendors who use this loophole to send dangerous substances over the United States border, the senators wrote. Chinese hackers compromised multiple Canadian government networks for years and stole information. Cyber threat actors from the People's Republic of China, or PRC, have been implicated in multiple breaches of networks associated with Canadian federal government agencies and departments, according to a report from the National Cybersecurity Agency. Over the past 4 years, at least 20 networks associated with Government of Canada agencies and departments have been compromised by PRC cyber threat actors, said the National Cyber Threat Assessment 2025-2026, released October 30 by the Canadian Centre for Cyber Security. The center identifies China as the top threat actor targeting Canada, noting that its cyber operations are second to none in scales, techniques, and ambitions. China's objectives include espionage, intellectual property theft, malign influence, and transnational repression, the center says. While the report highlights China's hacking of 20 federal government networks in the past 4 years, information elsewhere in the report shows that Chinese hackers have had access to multiple government networks longer than that. The report says that Chinese agents have compromised Canadian government networks over the past 5 years, collecting communications and other valuable information. While all known federal government compromises have been resolved, it is very likely that the actors responsible for these intrusions dedicated significant time and resources to learn about the target networks, the report reads. At a press conference on October 30, Caroline Xavier, head of the Canadian Communications Security Establishment, CSE, would not comment on the details of the breaches, but said mitigation measures had been effective. The key message for us, when there are incidents that occur, is really being focused on ensuring we minimize the impact to the government department that may have been compromised. And that is exactly where our focus has been, she told reporters. We do feel that the measures were taken to be able to mitigate any of the risks, and to address the incidents in an effective manner. The Cyber Center is hosted within CSE, which is responsible for collecting signals intelligence and defending against cyber attacks. In addition to federal agencies, provincial and territorial governments are also seen as valuable targets for China, the report said, noting that these governments hold decision-making power over regional trade and commerce, including the extraction of critical minerals and other natural resources. Xavier said this targeting indicates China is a sophisticated, consistent, and persistent actor, and that Canada needs to address the threat with a more comprehensive approach. We have work to do as a nation, to continue to work, in particular with the provinces, territories, Indigenous communities, because we recognize that we're all vulnerable, or we all could be vulnerable, and we really want to continue to raise Canada's cyber resilience, she said. The Cyber Center also echoed previous reports from various human rights groups, warning that China's transnational repression has primarily targeted 5 specific communities, referred to by Beijing as the 5 poisons. These include Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, supporters of Taiwanese independence, and pro-democracy activists. PRC actors very likely facilitate transnational repression by monitoring and harassing these groups online and tracking them using cyber surveillance, the report said. For example, the PRC has been publicly linked to cyber espionage operations against the Uyghur minority group, including members living in Canada, using spear phishing emails and spyware. The Centre for Cybersecurity says Canada has entered a new era in which cyber threats are ever present. Canadians will increasingly feel the impact of cyber incidents that have cascading and disruptive effects on their daily lives, the report said. The Centre says the threat has expanded as Canadians increasingly rely on online platforms and digital technologies to go about their lives. These systems record and process vast amounts of data about us, often over poorly secured or untrustworthy digital networks, it said. Aside from the threats from hostile state actors, the Centre notes that the cybercrime business model is underpinned by flourishing online marketplaces where leaked data is sold along with cyber tools for criminals. Australia boosts missile defense following China's ICBM test. Australia will enhance its missile defense and long-range strike capability following China's recent intercontinental ballistic missile (ICBM) test in the South Pacific, the country's defense industry minister said on October 30. China's Indo-Pacific neighbors expressed concern after the Chinese military tested an ICBM on September 25. Pat Conroy, the Australian Defence Industry Minister, said in a speech to the National Press Club of Australia on October 30, analysts believe we are now on the cusp of a new Indo-Pacific missile age, in which missiles are also tools of coercion. He said Australia will invest about 18 billion Australian dollars, or about $12 billion US dollars, in missile defense and cooperate with security partners in the United States, Japan, and South Korea to contribute to regional stability. Why do we need more missiles? Strategic competition between the United States and China is a primary feature of Australia's security environment, Conroy told the National Press Club in Australia's capital, Canberra. We expressed significant concern about that ballistic missile test, particularly its entry into the South Pacific given the Treaty of Rarotonga that says the Pacific should be a nuclear weapons-free zone. Australia was deploying SM-6 missiles on its Navy destroyer fleet to provide ballistic missile defense, he said. Earlier this month, Australia announced a deal worth $7 billion Australian dollars with the United States to acquire SM-2 and SM-6 long-range missiles for its Navy. Before September's test, the Chinese military had not fired a long-range missile into the Pacific since 1980. Analysts have said the missile, which carried a dummy warhead, was likely to be China's newest ICBM, the Dongfeng 41, or DF-41, or an older ICBM, the Dongfeng 31AG. Dongfeng means east wind in Chinese language. The DF-41 is China's longest-range ICBM, capable of traveling 12,000 to 15,000 kilometers, or about 7,456 to 9,321 miles. The DF-31AG has a shorter range of 7,000 to 11,700 kilometers, or about 4,350 to 7,270 miles. fired on September 25 from an undisclosed location, widely believed to be a site on Hainan Island, which sits south of the mainland China. The missile traveled about 12,000 kilometers, or about 7,456 miles, and landed near French Polynesia, a group of islands that includes Tahiti. China maintains a no-first-use policy regarding nuclear weapons and has urged other nuclear powers to make the same promise. However, analysts are skeptical of China's willingness to stick to its policy in a war scenario. China has more than 500 operational nuclear warheads in its arsenal, of which about 350 are carried by ICBMs, and will probably have more than 1,000 warheads by 2030, the Pentagon estimated in 2023. On October 30, the Australian government launched its plans to rapidly establish domestic missile manufacturing capability and develop long-range strikeability. The government, led by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of the Australian Labor Party, has committed to putting $74 billion Australian dollars in both domestic missile manufacturing and missile acquisition over the next decade. An Australian government report said that China continues to develop the largest ballistic missile program in the world, with an expanded arsenal of cruise and hypersonic missiles, and that this is taking place without the strategic reassurance or transparency the region expects from great powers. Under the Australian Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Plan, the country will move from having no dedicated guided missile manufacturing factories to at least 2 purpose-built ones by 2029. The government said it would also establish a munitions factory by the end of the decade to supply the Australian Defence Force with longer-range artillery ammunition. According to Australia's government, China is the country's largest two-way trading partner, accounting for 26% of its goods and services trade. Australia adheres to a One China policy, meaning it does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. An Australian-led joint statement delivered to the United Nations on October 22 expressed ongoing concerns about serious human rights violations in China. On October 23, Australia's ambassador to the United Nations, James Larson, called China to uphold human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet. EU busts tax fraud ring with underground Chinese banking ties. European authorities have dismantled a criminal gang suspected of evading €113 million, or $122.3 million, tax money while using a Chinese underground banking network. On October 25, the European Public Prosecutor's Office, EPPO, in Bologna and Milan, Italy, executed a freezing order of €116 million, or $125.53 million, against 33 suspects. 5 Chinese restaurants, 8 high-end cars, and 1 shopping center were seized, as well as a house and an apartment belonging to the suspects. Several bank accounts were also frozen. According to the EPPO, an independent public prosecution office of the European Union, searches were carried out in 20 cities in Italy on the day. The EPPO is responsible for investigating, prosecuting, and bringing to judgment crimes against the EU's financial interests. The officers arrested 7 suspects, including 2 alleged ringleaders, placed 5 suspects under house arrest with electronic bracelets, and mandated 2 other suspects to report regularly to the police. All of them are suspected of VAT, or value-added tax, fraud, criminal association, and money laundering. The investigation identified a complex scheme of international tax fraud, carried out through numerous ghost companies, missing traders, which imported hundreds of containers of clothing and accessories from China to Italy, using triangulations with Bulgaria and Greece to hide the origin of the goods, reads a statement by the EPPO. It is understood that the criminal scheme had a turnover of at least €500 million, or $541.07 million, while evading the payment of VAT and custom duties. Based on current evidence, illicit profits were laundered through a Chinese underground banking network with clandestine branches in Marche, central Italy. The overseas transfer of illicit funds was conducted via shell companies and false invoices, which helped circumvent anti-money laundering measures. The money passed through many European countries, including Bulgaria, Denmark, Estonia, France, Ireland, Germany, Greece, Spain, and the UK, before arriving to China, the prosecution office stated. The evidence shows that some of the money returned via banking to Italy, where the organization invested it in legitimate commercial businesses. The searches, conducted by the Italian police and supported by Bulgaria, Germany, and Greece authorities, also seized an extensive amount of documents. The crackdown is one of recent European efforts to dismantle criminal organizations involving Chinese nationals in the EU. On May 24, Europol, the European Union police agency, supported the Spanish police in breaking up 2 criminal organizations that smuggled over 1,000 Chinese nationals using various fraudulent methods. On July 2 and 3, coordinated European law enforcement efforts dismantled an international money laundering network in Spain, arrested 5 Chinese nationals, and seized nearly €160,000, or $173,319, in cash. Don't forget to comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from China Truths.